Could you repeat the title of the chapter, New Media?
New Media's Impact on Education Strategies. The most effective way to find it, I think, is the key in exact quote, Woodie, W-O-D-I-E, Flowers, close quote, and then New Media's Impact, and I think you'll get it quickly. Try it and let me know if it works. It did last time I tried.
What was the name of the first book in your presentation?
The first book is Life on Earth by E.O. Wilson. It's available through iBooks, and it's 7 volumes, and it's wonderfully free. It's just kind of amazing. E.O. Wilson sent his entire crew to Hollywood to learn production value, and the animations that are in those books are very impressive. Margaret and I are trying to learn some microbiology. It's a delightful presentation of some pretty complex material. The other resource that I think is very well done is the 2.009 design course website at MIT. And there are hundreds of student presentations and lots of materials available there. And one of the things that we have done, like one of the good pedagogy questions is, at what time in education does it make sense to start doing formal peer-to-peer evaluation? In that senior design course at MIT, peer-to-peer evaluation is a very important part of the course. And for MIT students, it's tough because in many cases, they've always been able to, quote, police their own trademark. They've been solely responsible for their evaluation of their grade. And all of a sudden, they're depending on 19 other people. And that's sometimes difficult, and learning to trust other people to carry their part of the load is hard. And learning to work with people without trying to dominate them is hard. So at what point should kids start interacting that way? And to what extent can it be formalized? And can it always be, like, is that a good way or a bad way to deal with bullying?
We have a comment from an audience member who said, no question, just wanted to comment on how thorough and outstanding the material was. Gave me a lot more to think about and present to our team. Thank you.
I think it's really, really, really important because all over the world, even for a long time we've known that education is important and we give it lip service, but all of a sudden it is really hot. And I think we owe it to young people to think very hard about it. And I think young people owe it to us to help us understand how they learn. I mean, they may be able to design experiments that we would never think about.
Our team thought visiting a college would be interesting for a field trip. Do you think the age group of First Lego League can benefit from this?
It depends upon the college. You know, sadly, what they might see is some of the stuff that I describe in the satirical story at the beginning of the chapter that I wrote. That chapter starts with a hypothetical that is Ms. Alien lands and happens to land on a university campus and runs into a professor. And Ms. Alien wants to learn about education on this planet. And the professor takes her around, and what she discovers is that there's almost no correlation between what's happening on campus and the stated goals of the university. So one thing you might learn is, if you go to a university, do you think you come away with an understanding of the core benefit proposition for the university? There probably is one stated, but it may not be reflected in the activities that are dominant there.
And we had a question from a gentleman who said, you had a statement in your presentation, do something ethically complex. Can you describe this concept a bit more, and how do you gauge complexity?
Well, that's a very complex question about ethical complexity. I'll give a simple form of the answer first. I wrote the foreword to Caroline Whitbeck's book on engineering ethics, and the first line of that foreword was, I said, I want to die proud of having been an engineer. And then I went on to say that unless we do a better job of making sure that professionals understand their ethical obligation to society, that may not turn out to be true. I've done experiments with seniors in mechanical engineering at MIT in which students were given small group tasks of designing the canons of ethical behavior for them as a group. And when they create canons that are associated with intellectual property for one another and respecting each other's ideas, they all agree. Done. Perfect mapping. If you ask them about the ethical obligation to people that might use the products that they're designing, there's a lot of consensus there. But if you get closer to home, and in particular, if you ask what are the canons of ethical behavior with regard to your obligation to some classmate who's had too much to drink, gets a little more complicated. And when I did that particular series of experiments, one of the questions was, what are the canons of ethical behavior regarding digital music? So the same group of kids who had said our ethical obligations regarding intellectual property for our colleagues is absolute, has somehow lost it and diverged wildly with regard to their ethical obligation to artists who created the music. Now, I love those guys. They're wonderful, they're smart, hardworking, they've done everything we'd asked them to do. But they had never been challenged to create a philosophically consistent set of ethical rules for themselves. Now, I'm not saying that you should have rules for yourself, but you need to learn to think about the epistemology of understanding kind of what's consistent. And I think starting young is really important. Young people today will face some questions that we can't even imagine now. And I think getting them to think about it a little bit is probably appropriate.
Is there a school or philosophy of education that you think exhibits the best practice of education versus training?
I think MIT does a good job because for a long time MIT has had the UROP program, the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, which is celebrated and 90% of the students participate in it, doing things to learn as opposed to sitting and listening. However, if you walk through MIT and any university that I know, there's a huge investment in classrooms with desks and the assumption that you're going to take notes. And faculty still struggle with what happens to all that students use machines to type in information. You know, Olin College is another exemplar with regard to trying to separate training from education. They still, the kids that are in college right now see the vanguard of highly developed digital support material. It's moving in. When Olin was founded, none of that stuff was really available yet. The transition is in process, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch schools shift emphasis. MIT, another comment about, forgive me for the editorial, but I believe that for good reason, people are worried about wealth distribution. We have a spike in nothing and a spike in poverty. The middle class is a fundamental part of making sure that economies work. We have the same sort of phenomenon in education. We have a group of very wealthy universities who are going to do really well because they're going to be able to take full advantage of the new tools and they will be able to innovate much more quickly. If I model MIT as part of that crowd, we have an obligation to create a tide that raises all boats, because if MIT and Harvard and Stanford and Yale get much better and the community colleges and state schools get wiped out, we're all toast. So creating ways to spread the educational wealth is really important, and pushing much more complex thinking down into K-12 is really important. Drinking content is not going to be the winner. Knowing how to think about new things is going to be much more important. If FLLers can help us understand how we make sure that kids not only want to learn but want to think creatively and embrace leadership and not be afraid of complexity. Right now we have a system that makes people afraid of trying complex things because they're afraid they're going to fail and get a bad grade. That's not the right philosophy to me. Forgive the editorial.
With new classroom materials available and new software and other technology, how do you see the role of the teacher changing in the classroom to facilitate more active learning and less lectures?
Well, I think there will be a big sort. I think there are a lot of, there are some teachers who are not going to adapt, and I think they're going to not be as important to the students, and they will not be as successful. The teachers that are willing to work with rather than talk to and spend the mental time, and I understand that teachers' lives are not simple. I understand that they're incredibly overloaded. I've spent my whole life doing that. You have to really work hard to create active learning things that really work, and you have to think a lot more than just picking up the notes and going in and covering that material. But doing one thing is probably more effective than talking about 10 things. So I don't think there's a magic formula. I think it depends very much on the kind of material you're trying to cover. But things are shifting. You know, understanding the skill set, go back to what is the core benefit of the particular class? You know, what is the goal? I'm not trying to get into endorsing or not endorsing standards, etc. I do feel that testing, well, I believe that in the United States, more than some countries, not as much as other countries, our education system, is choking to death on a failed training system. If we can get some help from machines to do the training so that when students show up in class, the teacher knows where all of them are in understanding and can help the ones that need help. You know, I think this business of having everybody march in lockstep will pass away. I think grades may even go away. And we're going to end up rewarding a different kind of student. A student, right now, I made good grades through being a pretty good passive learner. I got into MIT and out of Jena High School to go to college because I did active learning things that were quite different. So students who do nothing other than what they're told are probably not going to be the long-term winners. And a lot of the things that are the keys to the castle in the current system are probably going to lose relevance.
I'm on an older team and we're trying to get exactly this message to the younger kids. Do you have any tips on doing so?
Well, allow them to do some things that are active learning exercises and just find out how much more exciting it is to understand the world around them because you're interested in it. When I was hosting Scientific American Frontiers, I gave a series of talks that could be roughly called Technophobia is far more dangerous than technology. And one of the things that I did was I started making a list of the number of motors, not engines, but motors, electromechanical transducers, that Margaret and I owned. And when I got to 170, I got bored and quit. That was quite a few years ago. Now that list would be even much longer. So doing things like, you know, getting kids to find out how many motors there are in a modern automobile, and then say, do you want to go through life using all those things without having an idea how they work or not? I think tying technology and broad-based understanding to things that are happening in their life. You know, find a place where you combine technology with a complex ethical thing. Digital music is full of it. The web is full of it. Try to bring it home to them. And you know that the humans need not apply video that I suggested is a very tough and dystopic view of what might happen if will there be something left for us to do?
Love your emphasis to let technology to do the work human-to-human learning can't. How does tablet learning you demonstrate encourage that? Or where is the balance? What can be replaced with technology and what can't?
Well, that is a complex question. There was a 1-hour program yesterday on NPR about that debate. And today there's an announcement that the iPad deal between Los Angeles school system and Apple is broken down because of the politics of the way the deal was made. I'm absolutely convinced that you can take any fancy technology and give it bad software or bad content and make it fail. We have to have well-developed stuff in machines that work. You know, one of the problems in Los Angeles when they first started was the Wi-Fi systems couldn't support what the tablets were doing. So be very careful in paying attention to the reports and sort out the signal and noise. I'm a member of the board of Egopedia. I've watched what they're doing. I watched how the teachers respond to being able to do some of the things in class with the electronic book and then turn around and run the robot that's on the floor with a smartphone or directly in the browser. Closing the loop like that where you have the tablet doing the training and the human and the hardware and Mother Nature doing the education is the mix that I support. Just screens is not enough. Screens that augment uniquely human activities is getting close.
As a coach in FLL, I meet kids who are interested in engineering but have less than stellar math skills. Do you have any suggestions on how to help these kids and encourage them?
Tell them that Woodie Flowers hated math until I was a college student and was able to see some correlation that calculus could actually help me do things. I think we really do need to ask a question about how relevant the mathematician's version of math is to engineering now. In truth, very few engineers solve differential equations. They do finite difference math. So being able to reason about math is much more important than the kind of stuff that's typically on a math exam. And all of that is changing. In the AI lab at MIT recently announced that they had an AI system that could solve most of the, quote, algebra, the dreaded algebra word problem. So at some point, you'll be able to say to your smartphone, if a train is going 40 miles an hour, etc., what is, you know. So humans may not do that, but reasoning about the fundamentals, the phenomenon involved, is still going to be a human activity. Let me make a comment about that just to emphasize. One of the things that frightens me is that as we have moved into a more abstract world, we have black boxes that are commonly used tools that are completely opaque. You don't know what's happening in there. Even a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet that you yourself write, can have an error embedded in it and can be completely wrong. So unless you know enough to ask a critical question or two to make sure the answers make sense, you are using a dangerous, or you're using a tool dangerously. If you do a finite difference stress analysis of a complex structure and don't recognize that the answer that you got was complete nonsense, then you're a dangerous professional. So pulling back a little bit and making sure that you have a visceral understanding of things that came to you through hands-on active learning exercises may in fact be more important than the other part.
Really appreciate your perspective and wisdom. What are your thoughts on engaging girls and disadvantaged segments of the population? And similar to that, we also have somebody who's mentioned that it's been very difficult to get girls involved in First Lego League. Do you have any recommendations?
I have lots of complex, I can't answer that. So, it's a very, very open-ended question. So let me offer some comments about the reason I think the question is important, and to some extent it informs people to think about their own answer. Simon Baron-Cohen's book, The Essential Difference, which has the subtitle, The Truth About the Difference in the Male and Female Brain, I think is important. There's one plot where he plots systemizing versus empathizing. And we'd all like to think that we're super at systemizing and super at empathizing. We're not. Males test 70-30 towards systemizing, and females test 70-30 toward empathizing. My particular brand of ethics is rooted in empathy. I believe the reason we need more women in technology is that they bring a different set of things to the table, which is really critical. I believe that good products come from empathetic response to the users. I believe that good behavior comes from empathy-based ethics. So I'm very enthusiastic about getting more women involved not because it's fair, it's just advantageous. Likewise, with regard to underserved communities, we can't afford to have one part of the economy dragging another part because they didn't have, this year to the first community, I'm going to talk about facts and fairness. We need to have fact-based decisions that are based on some reasonable, thoughtful interpretation of fairness. Now, both the epistemology of facts is complex and the concept of fairness is complex, but young people need to think about both. Wouldn't it be wonderful if after the silent generation, me, and the boomers, and the X-Gens, and the millennials came the first Lego leaguers that started the fact and fairness generation, where we could actually get something done and get back to a reasonably balanced system? So I don't have a clean, simple answer because there is not one, but I promise you I'm pushing hard and working hard to make FIRST address that issue full bore. And I know that Don Bosey thinks it's very important, and I know that all the folks in the FLL organization thinks it's very important.
I did want to mention that we are actually planning to have a webinar on October 1st presented by one of our First LEGO League partners, Camille Sloan Schroeder from Iowa, that's going to talk about this very subject in a little bit more detail. So that topic will be how to engage girls in STEM and First LEGO League. What do you believe will be the most difficult part of this year's challenge?
I think narrowing the challenge to something specific so that you can get some results will be hard. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to get kids fired up. It's unusual problem because they may not see that it's in their soup. But I believe if you get them to understand that it's really important to them, I think it's going to be expansive, and getting it to come back down and focus may be the most difficult part.
As a teacher, I have seen there is a large expectation for all education to come from school alone. How can we get the family and community to see their role in the education, not just the training for our youth?
Well, that's another giant question, and I believe showing some success with individuals and making comparisons is a nice way to do it. For me, when I was in high school, we were literally dirt poor, and I was in a very small high school in Louisiana, and I didn't have a car to date, so I went to my father and said, I want to build a hot rod roadster, and he said, well, if you start the project, you got to finish it, but I'll help you. And so I learned more engineering building a hot rod roadster working with my father than I did in engineering school. It simply works, and there have been a whole bunch of studies on what correlates with success. I think everyone should pay attention, for example, to Angela Duckworth's work on grit. Grit is the mental toughness, the stick-to-itness. Grit correlates better with success in life than our classical IQ measurement. Grit is the stuff that university admissions officers are trying to evaluate so they can get the right people in. So if you can figure out a couple of ways to get community involved in making sure that students do things that are interesting and difficult and give them a source of rational self-esteem, go for it. And what it is depends upon where you are. You know, if you look at the projects that Boy Scouts do as part of their Eagle Scout project, those kinds of things I think could be very helpful to making sure that, you know, as I said, you'll never know what it feels like to help someone else until you do it and get a little shot of intellectual endorphins that makes you feel good on the way home. Try hard to cross that boundary. The other thing to notice is that FIRST has 120,000 dedicated volunteers that keep coming back because they got a little shot of feel-good out of what happened working with the young people. If you can get some people in the community that are not doing it to have that experience, then maybe that's the lever that keeps building.
With little available, how can children learn the best, and how can they find their strong points that can help them teach others in addition to teaching themselves?
I put in the folded card tower brick as an example of something that could be done with almost no resources by a group of people in an hour. I think there are lots of those kind of things. In fact, that might be a good definition of a problem for the FLL team to do, is how do you use scarce resources. I have a friend who is a maxillofacial surgeon, a very successful man who makes absolutely wonderful things out of bent coat hangers and does incredibly complex kinematics with bent coat hangers. So skillfully using limited resource might be a good theme for an FLL educational challenge.
Well, I believe that is bringing us a little over our hour, so I'd like to thank Dr. Flowers for your wonderful presentation today, and I'd like to thank the teams and coaches that were on the line. We are going to be posting this recording. We will be posting these to our team resources page at www.firstlegoleague.org. We'll also be posting it with a little additional commentary on fllblog.wordpress.com, which is our First Lego League blog. You'll also be able to find it on our FLL Global account on YouTube. You'll also find our last presentation there by Soren Thompson that was split up into two sections, the presentation itself and the open floor for questions. And I believe we might have to do that with this presentation as well, just because of the length. Our next webinar will be conducted on September 10th at 10 a.m. and our presenter will be Lee Magpili from Lego Education. Lee actually designs First Lego League models. He's a Lego Mindstorms designer, an EV3 programmer, and an experienced First Lego League coach. So he will be able to answer any questions coaches might have on programming your robot and working with the EV3 in particular. We are scheduling a presentation on October 1st about specifically engaging girls in STEM. Make sure that you watch your team blasts for information on how to register for those upcoming webinars. We'll be circulating the registration links on Friday. So thank you again for coming today.
I'd like to invite everyone to go to the FIRST website and look at my Ice Bucket Challenge. Take that to your students. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Excellent. Thanks again, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful